The pandemic lockdown has probably led a lot of people to start consuming some media they might not have otherwise looked into. So that begins the first in our new series, Nobody Asked, for a review of The Stand. Alright, so this one's all off script. This is just going from my memory of what happened because honestly I do not want to subject myself to another viewing of this show. It is a mess, and I probably wouldn't have paid attention to this show if it wasn't for the fact that I'm pretty much doing nothing right now, so why not? But the problem is that the creators of this show have no idea what they want this show to be. It ping-pongs back and forth between being something that should be this dark and ominous character study or this moral tale of good versus evil, and it never really finds its stride in either. First and foremost, the first 3 or so episodes are entirely told out of order. You get introduced to characters, then they flip back to what happened to them the year before the virus takes hold. So you're constantly being shuttled between different time periods and different characters, and it's really hard for a viewer that has no idea about what's in this book to actually locate themselves and figure out what's going on from scene to scene. There are plenty of examples of things happening in one scene and then the next scene taking place in the past or in the future with no indication that that's what's happened, except you got to use context clues.
Hey, how about we start over? I was hoping this would be a nicer conversation. It's been a while since I had one.
It's really messy storytelling, and the problem is when I started watching this show, you assume that there's some endpoint, there's some reason why everything's zigzagging back and forth like this. But upon completion of the entire series, there's really no reason for them to have done this. They could have told the story chronologically. We get a whole lot of Harold in the first couple of episodes, and I think this really speaks to the point that the creators really wanted this character to be a center point of the show. The problem is that because they've spent so much time on who he is and what he thinks, by the time that you're getting to the point where he could be having a crisis of conscience and might be coming around to the good way of thinking, there's no actual cliffhanger there. We know who this character is. We know he's kind of a bad guy.
Yeah. And everybody just loved Amy.
It's a really weird and sloppy storytelling technique that they decided to concentrate so intensely on this character at the beginning and then try to play off a later decision like we're not sure whether he's going to do the right thing.
I suppose we had 1 or 2 other things to think about.
I think it was pretty obvious to most viewers that he was probably going to do the wrong thing.
It's a possibility, yeah.
One of my biggest issues with adaptations is when the writers and the creators have to think about what is necessary to the plot, to the story that they are trying to tell. Obviously, when you have a book, especially a book that's as large as The Stand, you're not going to be able to fit in all the information that's present in the source. So you have to be able to pick and choose, and you have to be able to put into place exactly what needs to be there for the audience to understand the story you're trying to tell. And this show just cannot figure that out. They don't know if they want to be telling this intense character study between people of different backgrounds and different ideologies. They don't know whether it's supposed to be a confrontational affair between characters with different outlooks. They basically just keep flip-flopping back and forth between trying to tell this moral epic and these intense little personal and interpersonal interactions.
They told you it was wrong.
The problem with this is that the vast majority of the parts of this show that I liked were those interpersonal interactions. Basically around episode 5 and 6, you start to have these characters interacting in really interesting ways. You have the spies from Boulder in Vegas trying to navigate around Randall Flagg's operation and trying to gain intel.
You know what? Yeah, this is it's a waste of time.
You have Franny and Harold at the dinner table while Franny doesn't really, trust Harold in that moment and trying to figure out what obviously his plan might be. And Harold obviously is dejected and torn apart by the fact that he's about to do this really evil thing and he doesn't necessarily want to include Franny because his weird version of love is centered on her.
Blast of violence.
One pointed stroke of cruelty to set the world right.
This is the best part of this show, and it's given so little credence to the overall story, unfortunately. Overall, they get caught up in these set pieces, in these ideas of the good taking a stand against evil, which obviously part of the book, but the problem is that that's not what's interesting to the audience. That's not the point of what you've tried to create. You either create a show that is entirely plot driven, a show that's, you know, a Marvel movie, or you create something like Mad Men that's a character study. There are those that can thread the needle between both, like Breaking Bad, but they do that with so much more care and so much more attention paid to what they've set up. Whereas this show just kind of flies by the seat of the pants, constantly just rearranging and rechecking what it's done so far.
How long do you plan on going on with this?
We're at this very odd point in 2021 where we have to look at things that are coming out. They're on streaming platforms more often than not, but they're having to decide, are they going to drop everything all at once in a Netflix model, or are they going to do weekly releases, similar to what Disney Plus has been doing? And so CBS decided to go with weekly releases for this show, and I don't think it's the kind of show that you want to do that with. If people aren't immediately interested in what story you're trying to tell, if they're not immediately thrown into this position and thinking, okay, yeah, what happens next week, then you can't do a weekly release. You have to be able to give them something that they can hold on to. If I wasn't watching this during a time where I had nothing else to do in my life, I would not have watched past the first 2 episodes. It just wouldn't have happened.
Here I am, a lot closer to being the last man on Earth than I ever imagined.
I found pieces that I enjoyed starting around episode 5, but that was like pulling teeth to get to that point. And even then, the stuff that I enjoyed from this show decided to not stick around. You basically have the characters in this sort of espionage situation where they're trying to figure out and they're trying to work their way around unfamiliar territory. You have that completely erased 2 episodes later.
My guess, Cobb was following a checklist. Contingencies, if X, then Y.
By the time that the core group goes down to Vegas and they're going to get captured by Randall Flagg, I thought that we were going to see something of the same over episode 8 and 9. Basically having the idea of these people trying to like unlock the hearts and minds of the people in Vegas. And we don't get that.
Is he watching us?
We get about 5 minutes in a courtroom scene, and then one of the characters immediately dies, and then we get the other characters building up to a slow death. You don't have any of what I think the writers were trying to imply, basically that these good guys are coming in and they're swaying over the population of Vegas. We never really see that happen. They have one guy that kind of gets like, oh yeah, it kind of sounds right. But you don't get the payoff of them actually convincing large swaths of this operation that they're the bad guys, that they're following this false messiah.
I'm in a forgiving mood.
A couple of the good parts, the parts that the show really excels at, I really like the actor who plays Tom. I think they give a very nuanced and well-crafted look at somebody who's supposed to be intellectually disabled. And then they introduce Ezra Miller as Trash Can Man, which is, I'm told, a favorite of a lot of people who've read the books. And in this, he's just this ungodly caricature.
Grab him. I don't touch him.
And there's no empathy given to this character. There's no time for us to build up and think, this is a person that's in this position because of situational factors and because of the way he's been treated his whole life. It's this over-the-top, silly mess of a character that apparently the creators thought was so good that they needed to give him more attention.
You shouldn't be here.
They also have this tendency to show Randall's supposed to be getting his power from the people in Vegas by floating at a window. And although I guess I understand the impulse and what it's supposed to signify, by the time that you're getting to the end of the series, it looks so fucking silly. It just looks so dumb to see it portrayed this way.
Worship me!
In addition to that, they also go out of their way to have him basically have a glass of milk in his hand every time he's on screen, which if you've seen certain video essays before, you know is a pretty well-used trope to show that a character is sort of the other. They're odd. They're out of the norm. But it's just so ham-fisted and over the top. He's constantly doing one of these things that there's just no nuance to it. There's no subtlety involved.
We can't be 100% sure that this guy is okay. And if we can't be 100% sure...
Can't be 100% sure of anyone.
Overall, I think there are some aspects of this show that people can enjoy. I think there's something that could be here, a nugget somewhere underneath, but when it gets down to it, this show is ultimately something that I wouldn't put the time into unless I was a big fan and really needed to see this adaptation.
Shut the fuck up.
For the average viewer, it's so uninteresting in the current landscape of everything that exists in television and movies that I don't think there's any reason for it.
I'll be fine.
If you want to watch it, I'd say go ahead. Overall, this is a 5 out of 10 tops.